Good morning. I'm sorry I cannot be together with you. I would have loved to be this morning at Pablo University, but I'm away from Madrid, so I've left this conference recorded. I want to say thanks to our friend Luis Perea, who has been the organizer of this meeting, and I want also to say hello to the mayor of Makeni, the dean of University of Makeni, and my friends, the professors of University of Makeni that have safely come to Madrid. So I want to speak about the role of secret forest, not just in Sierra Leone, but in all West Africa, in the planning of cities. I was very lucky when in 2008 I was invited to go to Sierra Leone. Basically I went to the mission of Camagüey, then I discovered Makeni, and I was very impressed by many things. But I remember one day when I was invited to go to a small village called Kamangwang Barantan, that there was a place where the air was different, was even fresher. And somehow there was another kind of environment. There was a place where I couldn't enter, and I asked what was that. It was a sacred forest. And what I could see from outside of this sacred forest was that the trees were different, the birds, the sound were different, and I was really amazed because a few days later there was a fire. Many of the places where I've been were burning because of cattle rising, but sacred forests, I realized they don't burn. They are structures of forests that probably have remained from since thousands of years ago. So I would dare to say that sacred forests in Sierra Leone are reservoirs of biodiversity of ancient times. I think this has a very essential biodiversity value. So a couple of years later, working with some professors of Makeni University, we tried to learn a little bit more about this sacred forest. And one of my students was invited to visit 5 female sacred forests, and she tried to make some measures of biodiversity, especially in shrubs, and quantify what was the type of shrubs that were there. And we made an amazing discovery. We discovered that when a sacred forest was far away from a city, the level of biodiversity was high. All this was published in the journal Bois des Tropiques, and it was a really international impact. But basically, I come back to what I was explaining. Where sacred forests were alone, were close to a small village far from the cities, the level of biodiversity inside of them were amazing. Trees that didn't exist around the area were there. But when we were in a place close to Makeni, what we discovered is that the shrubs, the small biodiversity was very homogeneous. And basically, there were only one species, marijuana. This means that some of the sacred forests in Africa are being perverted in the sense of secularity. Sacred forests have always had a mission, but as the new secularism and modernism advanced not only in Europe but in Africa, the traditional uses of sacred forests, some of them are obviously awful, as the female mutilation, but that's not the only use of sacred forest. When basically the old traditions disappear, thanks God there are bad traditions like this one that disappear, which is good, but there are also a value of biodiversity that is really endangered. And because a sacred forest is a place where you cannot enter, the owners of the sacred forest can do what they want. And if they don't have the basic reason for having a sacred forest, the result is transforming the forest in a marijuana plantation. And what's the problem with that beyond drugs and some that basically that's the beginning of destruction. Because if you lose the sense of what you do, if you have a sacred forest that is not sacred, basically you could exchange it for building, for construction, for more roads, and all this biodiversity would be lost. So I really think that it's important in West Africa to have a regional inventory of these sacred forests. Even though we cannot enter in them and we must respect local communities and it's not about imposing things to people, but basically I think there are common good that should be registered in some place. And at the same time, cities are building. Now there are more of 50% of the population that lives in cities, and basically by the middle of this century we will be probably 70-80% of the population will be living in the cities. Many sacred forests will be inside of the growing African cities. So what can we do? At least we have to take a look at this problem and make some decisions. We have wonderful places that are losing their original sense, and as a consequence of this loss, they are going to disappear. So planners should take this into consideration, and here are some alternatives. First one is that if they are going to become marijuana plantations, we should at least know it. No? Perhaps if you use them for marijuana, then they are not so sacred as we could think. Second, if they are valuable, we must remember that most of the sacred forests in Africa are forests that surround a river. So they have also a value for purifying water. So even you don't have to enter, but the existence of this forest has a value for the water of the users of the city. So citizens could be aware of this value. We have to preserve this because it's important for our water. Also because it's important for our biodiversity and for our traditions. But if those places are so important, perhaps what we could do in some African cities that are expanding and they're integrating this sacred forest is to preserve them in a way of concentric circles. A sacred forest can be a nuclear area. It can be even a nuclear area that doesn't lose its function, its meaning, its sacred value, but it can be surrounded by other green areas that can make a ring. For example, linking different sacred forests around the city, we can make a green ring around the city. Basically, everybody needs places to play, to feel comfortable, to feed the soul, to spend nice time. So when we're planning African cities, it cannot be just a place for sleeping and working. It has to be a place for living. So we have to planify green areas, and I think we have to take into consideration these sacred forests as a nuclear point of these green areas, even though we cannot enter in them. But if we take a look to some of the cities of Occident, of Spain, we find that many of them, also in Latin America, in France, they are built around a church. So around the church, you build a park, you build the town hall, you build the main places and the beautiful areas, and you have the center of the city. At least this has been the way of building cities for many centuries in Europe. So, what is the most similar things many places and tribes in Africa have? Well, sometimes they have a church, a mosque, but many others have a forest. So we can build cities preserving the values of this forest. And a cathedral is a wonderful place. It's a place where you can pray in. For example, if you're a Catholic, you enter in a cathedral and you pray. Or if you go to a mosque, you only can enter if you're Muslim. But it has a value for people outside because it gives an articulation to the city. So you can create beautiful things around the church, like a plaza in Italy or in Spain, a courtyard, or beautiful buildings. We can do the same around the sacred forests that are going to be invaded by the city. We need to integrate it in the city planning. As Africa keeps developing, for example, more and more people would like to use bikes, for example, or go for a promenade with her girlfriend. So these green areas are important. And we have wonderful places that, again, you don't need to go inside, outside, and enter in a mosque. If I am not a Muslim, or if I'm not invited by a Muslim, many of them I cannot enter in. But again, it gives you a sense of beauty, a sense of integrity, a sense of identity that shouldn't be missed in a city. Otherwise, a city is like a body without a soul. And a sacred forest can be a soul for many, many things, many people in Africa. Even if they don't believe in their sacredness. Again, I discovered a beautiful area. I could see different trees, things that didn't take place around. So there is a special beauty in this. So my proposal is that we should have to take seriously to make an inventory of them. How can we do an inventory? We don't even have to enter inside of them. Again, if they're sacred, we have to respect this sense of sacred. But we can place them in a map. And for that reason, I think we should try to promote a research project where we can have an inventory with a description of what it can be, the values that we can at least see from outside, and the reasons why those places should be preserved. This could have a consequence, a legal framework for sacred forests that preserves them along the time from the expanding of the cities, the expanding of agriculture. For example, in many countries of West Africa, Chinese and Arabian companies are buying best lands, which are, by the way, I think it's a mistake, a big mistake. Losing your land is basically losing your soul, your identity. Okay, when someone from outside buys 10,000 hectares, he's not able to make a difference between sacred and not sacred. It's all measured by its utility. I can use this land. But if you have a law, if you have a regulation, or you have a place, this place has been declared as a sacred forest, recognized by national legislation of the country, even if you sell your land to a foreign company, that company should be obliged to respect that place. And that's really important. Imagine that company is going to plant soybean, is going to do a monospecific plantation or transgenic or whatever awful thing you want to do to the land. Okay, if that company has to respect this 1, 2, 3, 5 hectares of biodiversity, the sacred forest will be saving your land in the future, because when a foreign company buys land and then the price of a crop get reduced and disappear, they abandon the land. But basically, if you have planted the land just with a monospecific, transgenic, whatever you want to do, and you have erased all biodiversity from that place, if you have a sacred forest, you have a reservoir of biodiversity that will be able to colonize and to recover the health of these ecosystems that have been destroyed for some economic reasons in a moment. We must not forget that sacredness, the sense of sacred, has been one of the main drivers for environmental protection during the last centuries in all the world. If you go to Japan, you're going to see that temples are not just what is built in, but it's the garden. Buddhists consider the garden as part of the temples. If we go to the 1st century in Europe, Germans before Romans say that they didn't build churches because they considered that the forests were the most amazing cathedrals they could have later on. Cathedrals were also done. And if you go to America, you will also find how tribes feel a sense of presence, of divine presence in those places, or in the monasteries. 80% of the protected areas of the north of Spain, of Catalonia, for example, they are protected areas because they are the land that used to be owned by monasteries. So basically, along the centuries, there were no law to protect the environment. The sense of sacred was the main driver of an unconscious protection. I think that's the moment of doing it in Africa for city planning and also for biodiversity protection. And in this sense, I want to present a tool which is called Landscape, which is a GPS system that could be very helpful, and I want to propose it to you to be able to make the inventory. You just have to go with Landscape, which is an app that you can download for free in your mobile telephone. You just need to go close to a sacred forest, make a click, and then in a web that is automatically created, write what you've seen, a couple of pictures, and you will have instantly the inventory of your sacred forest with a web page that you can also connect it to a payment for ecosystem services, so that local communities that are feeling in danger of their sacred forest, or they have the tension of becoming their sacred forest in marijuana plantation, they can say, well, we can do a crowdfunding for preserving this sacred forest, and we can do that immediately with the software of Landscape we have, and I want to provide to you also as a part of a research project based on what could we do with the sacred forest in African cities. I think Makeni is a wonderful example to start researching what's the role in planning, what's the role in green areas, in rings, in environmental rings around the city, and also for national protection of the biodiversity, facing the difficulties, economic difficulties that at this moment are putting in risk of dispersion of this remaining biodiversity, which is an amazing treasure. It's one of the most amazing and beautiful heritage that West African people have. And I think that we need to be conscious of that, to integrate it in our research, in our city planning, and especially in our national law. Thank you very much, and I hope to be able to work with you in the following years to develop this idea. Thank you very much.